Alright, so this lesson is designed to help you up your blues game with adding just one simple element to your playing. We're talking about a dominant 7 triad. These are must-knows whether you're playing rhythm or lead. You can work them into both. And actually this composition we're going to be playing, we're going to be doing a little bit of rhythm, a little bit of lead. So this is a good example of how it all fits together. But what I love about them are they're simple to play, just a little 3-note chord, and there's only a few shapes that you have to memorize, and once you have those memorized, you can play them all over the neck. And you're going to be able to do that by the end of this video, or the end of this lesson, I should say. So I've got the lesson itself split into 2 parts. In this video, we're going to cover the first half of that solo, and I'm going to set up the dominant 7 thing, explain what all that is. If you'd like to learn the second half of the solo and download the tablature for this, as well as access the on-screen tab viewer, you can get those things by going to activemelody.com, go to the weekly lessons page, and do a search for EP386. Okay, so I want to go into just a little bit of theory about what a dominant 7 triad is first, and then we'll get into the lesson. Now, if you don't want to hear the theory part, you're just like trying to learn how to play the song or whatever, just skip ahead to the time on the screen. But really, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't know what they are, because I'm going to explain it, and you got to know that so that it all makes sense, right? Okay, so a triad itself is just a chord with 3 notes in it. It makes sense. Triad, 3, right? It's a chord with 3 notes. A chord, a major chord, is just the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the major scale. And when you play them together, you're playing a major chord. So if I want to play a G major chord, those 3 notes are G, B, and D, and they come right out of the major scale. So there's the major scale for G. So if I played the 1, if we put a number to each of those, and we played the 1, skip the 2, we go to the 3, skip the 4, and we go to the 5. So 1, 3, 5. That's my G, B, and my D. That's where that comes from, and that works for any major scale you play. You can always find the major chord by just finding the 1, the 3, and the 5 out of the major scale. I think you probably know that, but just wanted to say that. Okay, so now when we get into the 7, what is a 7? So if I'm looking at a chord chart and I see a G7, that used to confuse me because I would say, okay, so I'm going to play the 1, the 3, the 5, and then the 7. There's the 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. If I play those notes together, I get a sound like that. Well, okay, so that sounds like a chord, and it is a chord, but that's called a G major 7 chord. This was a point of confusion for me, and I'm sure it is for some of you. What is the difference between a major 7 chord and just a regular 7 chord, also known as a dominant 7 chord? Well, the difference is the major 7 chord is what we just played, but a dominant 7 chord is when you flat that 7. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but you flat it. That means you go down a fret on the guitar. Just go down a semitone. So when I add that note to the G chord, it sounds like that. Much bluesier sound. So that's what a G7 chord is. They don't necessarily write out dominant 7 when you're seeing it in a chord chart, but that's what a dominant 7 chord is. So that's how it works. And if you ever want to blues up your chord progression, if you've got a 1, 3, and 5, for example, like a G, C, and D, if I played each of those as a 7 chord, see how much bluesier it sounds just by converting those to 7. So that's the first little tip there, is convert your major chords into dominant 7 chords. And that just means you have to memorize what those chord shapes are. But this lesson is all about the triad. So some of you are going, wait a minute, okay, That makes sense. So those chords have 4 notes in them. They have the 1, the 3, the 5, and then the flat 7. But you're talking about a triad. A triad only has 3 notes in it. So how do you play a dominant 7 triad? That doesn't even make sense. Well, what you're doing is you're dropping one of the notes. Not the flat 7, though. You have to keep that one in there. But you're dropping either the 1, the 3, or the 5. So now you have a combination of 3 notes. So for example, if we look at, we'll look at this version, right? So it's 3 notes. That's a G7, but I'm playing the 1, the 3, and the 7. So I drop the 5. And there's different versions of this that we're going to learn as we get into this. So this one has the 1, the 5, but we dropped the 3. And so I've got the flat 7. And so we're just going to keep looking at those. Here's one that's got the 3 and the 5. And it actually doesn't even have the 1. It doesn't even have a G in it. But it's also got the flat 7. So that's another version of a dominant 7 triad. So that's really what a dominant 7 triad is. And I know some of you might be frustrated when you hear that because you think, oh gosh, do I have to sit and memorize all the notes of every chord and then learn which ones to... No. We're going to learn some shapes that's going to make this easy. So we're going to start this composition by playing this triad right here. And so I'm borrowing the first 4 strings on the 5th fret to play this. And then I have my middle finger on the 6th fret 2nd string. My ring finger is on the 7th fret 3rd string. And I'm playing strings 4, 3, and 2. Now that is a G7 triad playing on strings 4, 3, and 2. And when I started this, I went... So I hammered on. So I started with that 4th string, and then I hammered on my middle finger. And then I came down to this chord, which would be technically be a C chord, but we're just working it into this composition. So we have, so that's the strings 2, 3, and 4 on the 5th fret, and then we're going to come down to the G triad here. Now this whole composition is just a series of little triads. So once we're here, I'm going to bar the first 3 strings on the 3rd fret, and I'm going to hammer on with my middle finger to the 4th fret 3rd string. So all together we have. And then after that, to give some variation, I went and came up to this triad. So I kept that major chord there, that G major chord. That's where we're barring the first 2 strings on the 3rd fret, middle fingers on the 4th fret 3rd string. We're going to play that. Pinky comes up here to the 5th fret 2nd string and then slides up to the 6th fret 2nd string. That would be the G7, the G dominant 7 triad like that. So we have, so now you've learned 2 of them. You've got this one and you've got this one, right? So we have, so you can see what I'm doing there with my pinky. So from the beginning we have, there was an upstroke I did there on that 1 string. And then we played, we go back to that same shape that I started with, and I played this. So I've got my 3 fingers down there, and then my pinky goes down to the 8th fret 2nd string. We go back to that C chord, and then I go back to the hammer on there to play this G chord down here. So we have, and then I came up and played another version, another little triad. Now this is another essential triad. Now this is going to seem confusing right now in the beginning as we're learning the new ones, but we're going to start repurposing them. So keep that in mind. So I'm sliding up to with my middle finger to the 7th fret 3rd string, and then my ring finger's on the 7th fret 1st string. I've got my index finger on the 6th fret 2nd string. Now that shape should look familiar. That's the same shape that you would use when you're playing a D7 chord down in 1st position. But when you slide it up here, you're playing a G. And that's what I did there to play that. Slid it down and then back up. Now that chord voicing should sound familiar. You've probably heard that in Red House by Hendrix, right? He does that in A. It's the same kind of thing where you've got that dominant 7 triad, but you walk it down a half step and then go back up. With each of these triads, you can do that. So even that first one, you could do it. You could go into that second one. That one's a little harder to do, but And actually I do quite a bit of that where I play it and then I go down a half step and slide back into it. I think of Robert Johnson when I hear that. But that's just a classic blues move. Okay, from the beginning we have. All of that is the 1 chord. That's all represents the G chord. Now we go to the C chord. And then I went. So let's look at this. There's that D7 chord shape again. So once we've learned that shape, we can reuse it. We're just going to be on some different strings now. So I've got my middle finger on the 3rd fret 5th string this time. But I'm playing strings 5, 4, and 3. But you can see that I'm playing, really that's a C7 chord if you think of it this way. Okay, let's go from a C chord. There's a C chord, right? If I add my pinky to the 3rd fret 4th string, that's a C7. Well, I'm not playing the full chord, I'm just playing the triad. I'm just playing this. And I'm sliding into it. Like that. Now how you can remember this is I think of it off of this chord shape. So that's a C chord using the A shape out of Caged. Where I've got my index finger when I play that chord, that's where I can find this little 7 extension. So hopefully that makes sense. So if I'm playing a D chord, I can pull it out right there. Alright, so when we go into the C, I slide into it like that, and then I come up and played another one up here. So this is one where I've got my pinky and my ring finger on the 5th fret, strings 2 and 4. And then I've got basically a bar here on the 3rd fret, but I'm really only pushing down the 3rd string. So I'm playing strings 4, 3, and 2. That's a C dominant 7 triad. And again, the way that you can think about that is connect it back to your A chord shape. Not your A chord, but your C chord using the A shape out of Cage. So you can see that it's right there between the 3rd fret and the 5th fret. So now I can use that over any chord, right? Okay, I slid into the C7 there, played another version of it there, came back to it, and then I went. Now this is going from the C6 to the C9, so I'm breaking protocol here just to throw in a 6 and 9, but these are both triads as well. So the C6 triad looks like that. We're barring the first 3 strings on the 5th fret. Super easy to play. I slid into it like that, and then walked down 2 frets to the 3rd fret, which would be the C9 chord. C6, C9, connected back to that C chord using the A chord shape so that you can play. You can see how that it also goes between the 5th fret and the 3rd fret, just like you do when you make the chord. Alright, let's back it up from the beginning and play up to that point. So we have. Down to the C. And then we go back to the G. And I played this. So I went back into this G7 triad, the one we've already played, and walked it down 2 frets. Pinky goes up to the 7th fret 1st string and comes off, so, and then back to that G triad. So we have, and then I went, and that's just playing strings 1 and 2. So I'm barring there on the 3rd fret, and I'm using my ring finger for this. Some of you may want to use your pinky. That probably makes more sense, but I've got my bar there on the 3rd fret, ring fingers on the 5th fret 2nd string, and then I'm gonna go, and I just slide into that. Now that's not even a full chord. That would be that G7 chord, but I'm just playing those 2 notes out of it. Because honestly, it's harder for me to make that chord, and I find I get just as much value by playing, 2 notes instead of all 3. But I'm hinting at this G7 triad. Then it goes to the 5 chord, which is the D. And what I did here was, okay, let's think about the D chord. There's your D chord, playing using the A shape, right? If I were to take where my pinky is, which would be the 7th fret, and replace that with a bar, just playing the top 3 strings, and then go up 1 more fret to the 8th fret 1st string, now I've got a little triad, a little dominant 7 triad for that chord. So that's a D7 dominant triad. Really cool. I love that one because it's easy to find off of this chord shape. So there's my C chord. There's my C dominant 7 triad right there. So we have So I came up there with my pinky up to the 10th fret first string and hit that. Now the song goes from that back to the C, and I went. So I did a walk up 5, 6, 7 on the 5th string, and then I went ahead and barred and played this, played strings 4, 3, and 2, which is your C chord, right? But I'm playing like that. So this is another triad, another dominant 7 triad, played using strings 4, 3, and 2. So if I'm barring there on the 5th fret, I come up to the 7th fret 4th string, and then go up to the 8th fret 4th string. 4, 3, and 2. Love the sound of that. To me, that's just a beautiful dominant 7 triad. So if you like the sound of that and you want to use it going forward, just remember it off of this A chord shape. So if I'm playing a C chord where my pinky is, I'm going to replace that with my index finger, and then I can come up into this 7 chord. You can get a lot of mileage out of this. And I'm just connecting it in my mind all back to this chord shape. Okay, so then we go back to the G chord, G triad. And then I just walked it down, did a classic. And look at that. That's going back to that dominant 7, the red house chord. Think of it that way. We're going back up to that. So it's a G dominant 7 triad. We're just going to walk it down until I get back to the G major chord. And then I played another triad right here. It's the same one we did when we went to the C, right? But now we're doing it up, going up 2 frets. We're playing the D7. And so I'm playing it here. So I got my middle finger on the 5th fret 5th string, go down and slide back into position. And you can see that's the D7 triad because you can connect it in your mind back to this D chord using the A shape. See where my index finger is? There it is, right? So we're repurposing a lot of these same shapes. And actually when we go into part 2, we're going to even continue doing that. We're going to reuse the same ones but in different positions. So the next time you're playing a blues solo using like the pentatonic scale, don't be afraid to come into some of these chord shapes and either play the notes out of the chords that way, or just play the chords. So you can see So am I playing lead there? Am I playing rhythm? I'm kind of doing both. I'm working in those dominant 7 triads all over the place. These are the ones that you already know, so you can do that same stuff. There's that sliding up. I use that all the time. Right? And then you come. Okay, let me back up and play through this first half one more time. Hopefully that's giving you some ideas for how you can start using these things when you play. Just remember, if you'd like to learn that second half, just go over to Active Melody and check out EP386. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, click the alert bell, and then you can be notified when I put out new lessons, which I do every week. All right, here we go, from the beginning.